So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the Titan Elite 2. This is a phone from Unihertz, who continue to just, excite me with the direction they're taking in smartphones. Smartphones is one of these things that I really think about a lot in terms of what it is as a device. Where does the utility lie? Where does it go too far in terms of becoming a distraction thing and destroying our intention and our attention? So I'm very interested in phones that explore different form factors. We've been fed this idea of a scrolling slab for so long with no keyboard. This, by definition, this is a device that is designed for consumption of stuff. It's not a device that's designed for productivity. It cannot be a productivity device without a keyboard. This is a layer of kind of expected use that sits above, in my mind, where the real utility of a smartphone lies. So I think what's fascinating about the Titan 2 Elite is they've kind of made a cyberdeck without even realizing. So this cyberdeck is this idea that it's a sort of DIY, usually Linux kind of machine, very small, very portable, with a keyboard that lets you do accurate typing into a command line or something where if you want to be a little bit more productive, and look at that as a portable productivity machine rather than a portable distraction machine. So obviously we're seeing a lot of the industry pushing towards just folding phones, which I think actually does nothing for the productivity of these things. It just makes them more like tablets, which again, for me, have only proven themselves to be kind of useless devices as well. It just makes them more suitable for distracting and consumption content and not useful as a productivity tool. I bought the 12-inch MacBook from 2017. I picked this up off eBay for a couple of £100. This was an amazing tool. It's incredibly small. It's the full Mac experience with a real full-size keyboard in the smallest possible form factor. And that is a device that interests me. That's my ultimate portable productivity tool. But I think there is this case for something that is even smaller, a bit more like this idea of a cyberdeck, or like the old Sony Vios, those tiny little sort of folding thin things with the keyboard. Those kinds of devices fascinate me. So this is a device that I think is really pushing in that direction. Of course, it is a thumb typer. This is the difference. You're not typing with your fingers on this. It's a thumb typer. But that has its own set of really interesting things because it's just small enough that you can actually thumb type with one hand on it. But of course, if you use two thumbs, you can level the whole thing up and type even faster and more accurately on this. And we'll get more onto the keyboard in a second. So from my time with the Jelly Star, which is a 3-inch Android smartphone, this was just the ultimate exercise for me in demonstrating all you need is a 3-inch phone for the utility. The main utility in a smartphone is achieved by a phone with a 3-inch screen. Easy, done. I believe that. I love the Jelly Star. It's an amazing thing. But there is this idea that obviously you can't do anything productive on the Jelly Star. It is purely for that sort of smartphone package of utility, generally sort of interacting with things through Bluetooth or, logging onto an app to pay for something when you're out and about, these kinds of things, or maps, plugging into the car, of course, powering the car screen, great utility from smartphones in that kind of area. And the Jelly Star does all of that. Absolutely fine. But this idea is, what if you made it a little bit bigger, gave it a real keyboard? Could it then become actually a useful productivity tool that would let you connect over a terminal, command line to a server and actually do some sort of important task in a way that would just be infuriating with a touchscreen keyboard? That is the interesting thing about the Titan 2 Elite for me. So obviously the striking thing about this is the form factor. It's not a tall phone. It's basically got a square screen. I'm not sure if it's exactly square, but it's not far off. And of course, then the keyboard sits below it. But overall, the phone is still very small. Actually, I was sort of getting this thinking it might be a bit more of a kind of tablet hybrid sort of experience. It's not. It's really small. It's small enough to be treated like a normal smartphone. It can go in your back pocket. It's there, but it has this real keyboard. It's got a fingerprint sensor on the side, which is super responsive. Had no issues with that. You can set up multiple fingers. Obviously, do it with your left index finger as you're holding the phone, or you can set up with your right thumb, and whichever way you hold it or pick it up, it just works super fast. Very effective. The screen itself is exactly what you'd expect from a modern smartphone. Incredibly bright, incredibly fast response time. It just looks great and does everything you'd want. And it's got a bunch of really good cameras in as well, if that's your thing. For me, I carry real cameras with me. So the role of a camera on a smart device like this for me is really just QR codes and video calling. It doesn't have wireless charging. I think they wanted to try and keep it as small as possible. It's still quite chunky, compared to an iPhone, but it's got great battery life. It does what it needs to do. It doesn't need to be any thinner. I'm quite happy with its proportions. Okay, so let's talk about the keyboard. Now, I'm obviously a keyboard enthusiast. This is my thing. I'm super into keyboards. So the idea of a keyboard on a smartphone like this is absolutely fascinating. The first thing that really struck me was that actually the homing bump, there's only one homing bump, and it's on the D key. So, normally your homing bumps are on the F and J keys on a normal keyboard for your index fingers. I thought maybe they would do the same thing, on the F and J key, but to orient your thumbs, like maybe that would be the approach. But they haven't. They've just put the one homing bump on the D. So there's obviously this idea that it is actually a device that can still be used from one hand. Obviously, in reality, when you're holding the phone with both hands, the orientation and the homing element isn't a problem. It's very easy to feel your way around that keyboard, and that's something they've taken quite seriously with the profile of the keys. Each key has a very tactile kind of bump. It's got a sort of ridge cut out of the side, and you can see that shape on the relief of those keys. You can move your thumbs around the surface of those keys and really feel where they are. I'm almost touch typing on it. I'm not quite. I'm still glancing at it every now and again. I think it'll be, before long, I'll be able to feel my way around this, and I'll be able to touch type on it whilst looking at the screen. And this is where the feeling of using this device really comes into it feeling like a small computer, because you can look at the screen while you're typing. Now, this is a feeling that is compounded by the fact that the surface of the keyboard is also a trackpad. So you can scroll on the surface of the keyboard with your thumb, just, without clicking the buttons and just sliding your thumb over the surface. That will scroll the screen. And this isn't just a simple scroll. This is way more than that. This is like a zoned touchpad thing that you can swipe and scroll horizontally. So if you've got like a bunch of emails on the screen, depending where you swipe horizontally is, depending which email responds to that horizontal swipe. So you've got some incredible gesture support here that, it's just unbelievable to see on a phone with a physical keyboard. They haven't just put a keyboard on a phone and called it done. They're doing something really interesting here with this trackpad. Other gestures like the flick support, so it will predict the 3 words that it's most likely to be. If you flick up underneath each of those thirds where they display, it will select that word and add the space. So you don't even have to reach for the space bar in most of the normal typing. So these kinds of things are all absolutely interesting as well. And it supports a tapping mode as well. There is this kind of interesting idea, and I don't know how much of this is going to be sort of refined as they work towards their release, but it supports a tapping mode where you can just tap on the screen to tap like it's mapped roughly. Again, you sort of get an idea of where it is that tapping on the keyboard is going to correspond to a tap on the screen. But there's also a mode that doesn't have the tap support, and it's just designed for the scrolling support, which is really interesting. But I have found that you can actually sort of trick the Android operating system into firing a hold tap event. If you sort of move the thumb around in one place with, and don't move it too far, the operating system sort of thinks you're doing a long tap and it will trigger that. So I'm not quite sure if there's a solution for that, or if that's going to be ironed out, or if you just learn to not linger in one place to avoid that happening and just sort of think about it in terms of swiping. What's quite interesting is the 3 Android symbol keys, the home key, the app switcher, and the back key are actually normal keys in the keyboard as well. I think that's sort of quite a nice way of integrating this into the Android idea. The other very interesting thing the keyboard supports is the idea of a hotkey to open applications, and this is such a computer feeling thing to me. I have this on my keyboard layout. I have app switching hotkeys where I just hold down my spacebar with my thumb, and then a letter will jump to an app or a workspace on the Mac operating system. This has the same thing for launching apps, so you can hold down the function key and then hit a letter, and it will open the app that you set up. This is just brilliant. I've always thought the idea of sort of launching apps on a smartphone with the sort of scrolling tiles of apps, it's a bit tedious. I usually end up just swiping down and using the search actually, but this is a level up from that in terms of that shortcut experience. The other thing the keyboard does, if you double tap it, it will put it into a cursor positioning mode where you then just swipe your finger around and you can move the cursor in your text. Again, those kinds of things I think on a device like this are just super powerful, and it's brilliant to see that they're putting this much attention into the hardware of the keyboard in this. I'm very excited by the direction this is going. In that actual productivity output creation direction, where you can actually type with accuracy enough to use a command line, for example. So one of the workflows I've been experimenting with a little bit using sort of small devices like this is this idea of having a local Whisper model running that runs through a little web app that I can access on the browser on the phone. And I can talk into that and it converts to text in real time and puts it into a Tmux session that is running on the Mac. But also I can then view that in an app like Termux on the Android phone, and I can be working with a Claude Code prompt or something in there using my voice predominantly. But quite often what happens is you need the accurate correction on a piece of text. It's not enough just to rely on the voice. when you're coding with Claude Code, you need sometimes to be giving it a precise path or something, and you just want that accuracy. Having the keyboard on there for those little bits where you're actually adding that accurate correction to those prompts in an app like Termux is brilliant. So this is, I think, a really good role for a device like that. It's just that ability to type with 100% accuracy, at reasonable speed. I actually just challenged a friend of mine we just jumped onto Monkey Type, him on his phone with a touchscreen keyboard and me on this, and I got 100% accuracy, faster words per minute than he did. I think I hit about 40 words a minute, which I mean is not super fast. I think I can push that a little bit on that. For me, using a touchscreen keyboard is such an unpleasant process. As a keyboard enthusiast, the idea of using a touchscreen keyboard, even if you can swipe type and you get quite fast, you get to the point where you're trying to do something accurately or, correct some punctuation or something, and it falls down and it starts to feel unpleasant in a way that a hardware keyboard just doesn't. So this is on Kickstarter at the moment. This is not actually available yet, but it's very close. And this feels like a very polished, we're definitely late in the stages of their release cycle. Of all the interesting things that are happening in the smartphone world, I think keep an eye on Unihertz. They're doing interesting things, and they're exploring the boundaries of what a smartphone is or can be for us. And they're pushing back on just the standard idea that it's a device to make you spend time on scrolling. They're either pushing towards optimizing for ultimate portability and just letting the smartphone thing do what it needs to do and nothing more. But then devices like the Titan 2 Elite that are really pushing in this idea that it can do a little bit more